When I went to pick up my daughter from my mother's house, she was standing on the railing of a second-floor balcony. My mother laughed. Bad girls need to reflect on their behavior. My sister sipped her coffee and said, "My kids are napping much better trained." My daughter cried, "Mommy, I was so scared." That's when I decided they would regret this. It was a morning when autumn sunlight poured into Melissa Collins's kitchen in the suburbs of Boston, in the Maplewood district. Melissa hurriedly took a sip of coffee and glanced at her watch. Today was another race against time. "Harper, hurry up. We're going to be late." "I'm ready, Mom," Harper said, running down the stairs with a small backpack on her shoulder. The 10-year-old girl's eyes were a clear blue, inherited from her mother. Intelligence shone behind her round-framed glasses, and her bangs were a bit too long because her mother had been too busy to take her to the hair salon. "Who's picking me up today?" Harper asked while drizzling honey on her breakfast pancakes. "I'm sorry, honey. I have a final presentation for a big project today. Grandma will pick you up from school." Harper's fork paused slightly on her plate. It was just for a moment, but Melissa's sharp maternal instinct sensed something. "What's wrong? Don't you want to go to Grandma's house?" Harper quickly shook her head. "No, it's fine." Melissa noticed that her daughter's eyes were avoiding her own. But there was no time to think about it this morning. She picked up a stack of papers from the kitchen counter and stuffed them into her briefcase. "Then I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. Say hello to Grandma and Aunt Vanessa for me." Melissa kissed Harper on the cheek and hurried to the door. Looking back, Harper was standing by the kitchen window, watching her. There seemed to be something she wanted to say, but Melissa had no time. She made a mental note to talk to her later. While driving, Melissa thought about her life. As a single mother, she was constantly walking a tightrope. Since divorcing her ex-husband Daniel 3 years ago, she had been raising Harper alone while working hard to establish her position at an interior design company. Daniel had moved to Chicago and only came to see his daughter occasionally on weekends. Fortunately, her mother Judith and sister Vanessa lived in the same town and helped take care of Harper. As Melissa waited at a stoplight, she reflected on Harper's recent behavior. Her once lively and cheerful daughter sometimes became quiet after returning from her grandmother's house. At first, she thought it was just fatigue, but it had been happening more frequently. When she arrived at the office, Melissa switched to work mode. Her design company was small but well regarded, handling many renovation projects in upscale residential areas. Today's presentation was a commission from a major hotel chain, a project that could lead to a breakthrough for the company if successful. She immersed herself in work during the day, but in the evening, thoughts of Harper crossed her mind again. When she called her mother, Judith's voice sounded bright, as if nothing was wrong. "Harper is doing her homework. She's eaten dinner, so don't worry. Does she seem okay? Anything different?" "Different?" A slight tension ran through Judith's voice. "Nothing at all. She's just become a bit rebellious lately. It's part of growing up." Melissa frowned. Rebellious? Harper was, if anything, too quiet both at school and at home. That night, with a glass of wine in hand, Melissa gazed out the living room window. Tomorrow morning, she would have a serious talk with Harper. If there was a problem, she couldn't ignore it. However, something she had never imagined happened that night. After midnight, she was awakened by a scream. Melissa jumped up and rushed to her daughter's room, where Harper was curled up on the bed, trembling. "Did you have a nightmare?" Melissa embraced her daughter. Harper remained silent for a while, crying in her mother's arms, but eventually said in a small voice, "Mom, please, I don't want to go to Grandma's house anymore." A cold feeling spread through Melissa's chest. "Why? What happened?" Harper shook her head. "I can't say. They'll be angry." "Who will be angry?" "Grandma and Aunt Vanessa." Melissa cradled her daughter's face in her hands and looked into her eyes. "Harper, what did they do to you?" But Harper wouldn't say anything more. Melissa, suppressing a mixture of anger and anxiety, stayed by her daughter's side until she fell asleep again. The next morning, Melissa called her office, saying she had an urgent family matter. Then she called her mother. "Oh, Melissa, what is it?" Judith's voice was as calm and gentle as usual. "Mom, Harper woke up from a nightmare last night. She says she doesn't want to go to your house. Did something happen?" After a silence, Judith sighed. "Children need strict discipline, Melissa. You're too lenient." "Discipline? What kind of discipline? Just normal things. The same as when you were a child. Don't you remember? Melissa tried to recall her own childhood. Her mother had certainly been strict, but she didn't remember being abused. At least, that's what she thought. After hanging up, Melissa also contacted her sister Vanessa. But her sister's response was similar. You're too lenient. My children are properly disciplined. Vanessa's voice was cold. I understand you're busy as a career woman, but child rearing can't be compromised. Melissa hung up and looked at Harper, who was standing by the window. Melissa began adjusting her work schedule. She postponed several meetings this week and sent apologetic emails with polite explanations to clients. Her work priorities, which she normally never compromised, were now focused entirely on her daughter's safety. Jordan, do you have a minute? Melissa called her assistant. He appeared in her office immediately, holding a cafe latte. Can you reschedule the presentation for Ashley Holmes by 2 days? I have a family emergency. Of course, Jordan looked surprised. It was the first time Melissa had canceled work for personal reasons. Is everything all right? Melissa hesitated for a moment. I'm a bit worried about Harper, she said, not elaborating further. That afternoon, Melissa called her mother. Mom, can I leave Harper with you tomorrow? I have an important meeting. Of course, you're always welcome. Judith's voice was kind and warm. Melissa was confused. This was the voice of her mother that she had known since childhood. Could she really be cold to Harper? The next day, after dropping Harper off at school, Melissa went to a nearby cafe instead of heading to work as usual. There, she opened her laptop and began listing the changes in her daughter over the past few weeks. Tightness in her chest. These were signs that something was clearly wrong. She made a decision. Today, she would go 2 hours earlier than the pickup time she had told her mother. Without warning. At 3 p.m., Melissa drove past her mother's large white house without stopping, turned the corner, and parked on the street. From there, she walked to the backyard. It was a shortcut she had often used as a child. The trees in the backyard concealed her presence. As Melissa approached the garden, she heard voices through an open window. It was her mother and Vanessa talking. This child has no discipline. Her mother's voice was audible. Melissa is too lenient. Truly, came Vanessa's agreeing voice. Your children are raised much better, Vanessa. Always well behaved. Melissa frowned. Had her mother always praised her sister's parenting to others while criticizing Melissa at home? She moved closer to the window to hear more. Melissa is too busy to even think about Harper. Vanessa's voice echoed coldly. I wonder what would become of that child without us. Melissa felt anger but tried to stay calm. She needed to assess the situation objectively. As she stood in the shade of the garden trees, considering what to do, she heard a faint crying sound. It was Harper's voice. Melissa's maternal instinct awakened. She silently headed for the back door of the house, checking if the key was still hidden in the place she used as a child. Her mother had kept a spare key in the same spot for decades. She retrieved the key from under a stone and slowly opened the door. The hallway was quiet. Melissa moved noiselessly across the carpet and peeked into the living room. There, Vanessa's 2 children were watching TV and eating snacks, but Harper was nowhere to be seen. The crying sound came from another room. The study. Melissa gently opened the door and saw an unbelievable sight. Harper was seated in a chair in the corner of the room, with no food or drink, facing papers that looked like homework. Her small shoulders were trembling. Harper? Melissa called softly. The girl turned around in surprise and, seeing her mother, her eyes widened. Mom! She looked like she wanted to jump up but remained seated in the chair, as if afraid of something. Are you okay? What happened? Melissa approached her daughter. Harper looked around, making sure no one was coming, and said in a small voice, Don't tell Mom. She looked up pleadingly. Grandma and Aunt Vanessa will get angry. What happened? Can you tell me? Melissa knelt down to be at eye level with her daughter. I just spilled juice but they said no meals. Harper's voice trembled. And sometimes, they make me stand in high places to look out the window. Melissa felt her face heat up. High places. On the railing of the veranda. It's very scary, Mom. Something broke in Melissa's head. She hugged her daughter, but at that moment, footsteps were heard from the hallway. Harper. Have you finished your homework? It was her mother's voice. Then, Vanessa's voice was also heard. Your timeout isn't over yet. Melissa slowly stood up and turned toward the door. Her mother and Vanessa were standing there, clearly surprised to see her. Melissa, you're already here? Her mother said in a confused voice. Yes, I came early, Melissa answered coolly. Is there something you want to explain? Of course, we were just disciplining her, Vanessa quickly said. You're too lenient. Discipline? Melissa's voice was low and dangerously resonant. Not giving meals is abuse. You're exaggerating. Her mother shrugged. Our generation was much stricter. At that moment, Vanessa muttered something. If we could prove that Melissa failed at parenting, Melissa's intuition sharpened. What did these words mean? Were her mother and sister trying to separate her from her daughter? Melissa understood the situation in an instant. This wasn't just strict discipline, it was something more malicious. Maintaining outward calm, she took Harper's hand. I'm taking Harper home today. And tomorrow, and the day after that, I will never leave her here again. Melissa, calm down, her mother said in a stern tone. Don't believe what she says. Children sometimes lie. Melissa drew Harper closer. Don't call my daughter a liar, her voice trembled, but it was from anger. A week later, Melissa was driving, mentally reviewing her plan repeatedly. Over the past few days, she had consulted with a lawyer and received advice on how to collect evidence of child abuse. Today was the day to execute that plan. Are you really okay with this? She asked Harper, who sat in the passenger seat. Checking that the small voice recorder attached to her small body and the hidden camera in her backpack were working properly. Yes. Harper's response was tinged with anxiety. But I'm scared. You're a brave girl, Melissa said gently. If anything happens, I'll come help you right away. I'll be nearby. The plan was simple. Take Harper to her mother's house as scheduled, say Melissa would pick her up in a few hours, and leave. But in reality, she would park nearby and wait. Then return to the house 1 hour earlier than planned to check the situation. Melissa stopped the car in front of her mother's house and took a deep breath. Ready? Harper nodded slightly. They approached the front door and rang the doorbell. Judith opened the door and greeted them with her usual warm smile. Oh, Melissa. How are you, Harper? She stroked Harper's head. The gesture seemed affectionate, but Melissa felt Harper's body tense slightly. I'll pick her up at 4, Melissa said. I have a lot of work today. Of course, don't worry. We'll take care of her. Judith smiled. Vanessa is here with her children too. Melissa gave her daughter one last hug, silently promising, I'll be back soon. She got in her car and pretended to drive away, but stopped around the corner and checked her watch. In 3 hours, she would return on foot to observe her mother's house. Those 3 hours felt like an eternity. Melissa tried to work in a cafe but couldn't concentrate. When the clock struck 3, she got up and headed for her mother's house. As she approached the house, she noticed the wind was getting stronger, a harbinger of an autumn storm. Melissa sneaked into the backyard and observed the house. Suddenly, her eyes were drawn to the second-floor veranda, and her blood froze. There was Harper, standing on the veranda railing, buffeted by the wind, trying to maintain her balance. About 7 meters above the ground, one misstep could result in a fall. Melissa's heart pounded fiercely. She trembled with fear and anger, but desperately tried to maintain her rationality. She quickly crossed the garden, looking for her mother and Vanessa. The two were in the garden below. Judith was tending to the flower bed with gardening gloves still on, and Vanessa was relaxing in a deck chair, as if nothing was wrong. Hello, Mother, Melissa said in a cold voice. Judith turned around in surprise. Melissa, you're already here? It's not 4 yet. Yes, I finished early. Melissa looked up at the sky and pointed to the veranda. What is that? What are you doing? Judith shrugged. Oh, Harper. She smiled. Bad children need to reflect. Reflect? Melissa's voice trembled. At that height? In the wind? You're exaggerating, Vanessa said, putting down her coffee cup. My children are napping, she added proudly. Because I discipline them properly. Melissa was speechless at their callousness. She immediately rushed into the house and up the stairs. The sound of the wind and Harper's feeble crying could be heard from the veranda. Harper! Melissa opened the veranda door. Mom! Harper turned around, her face wet with tears. I was scared. Help me. Melissa carefully approached Harper. Her heart tightened seeing the small body being buffeted by the wind. Stay still. I'll help you now. She carefully lowered Harper from the railing and held her tightly. The girl's body was cold and trembling. How long have you been here? About 2 hours. Harper sobbed. When I said I needed to go to the bathroom, they said I'd have to stand longer. Melissa felt her entire body grow hot with anger. She carried Harper downstairs. There, her mother and sister stood as if they had done nothing wrong. This is the last time, Melissa said coldly. I will never let you see Harper again. You're exaggerating, her mother said. Our generation was much stricter. Today's children are too spoiled. Vanessa sneered. It's because of mothers like you that Harper is becoming such a problem child. At that moment, Melissa made a decision. She slowly reached into her jacket pocket and took out her smartphone. Everything has been recorded, she said. Then, she retrieved a small camera from Harper's backpack. I have evidence of all the abuse so far. The blood drained from Judith and Vanessa's faces. They were speechless, looking at each other. Mom, were you recording? Harper asked in a small voice. Yes, to protect you, Melissa answered gently. I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. What do you intend to do? Judith raised her voice in agitation. We're family. Melissa replied coldly. Family? You abused my daughter. This is unforgivable. You must be joking, Vanessa argued. Disciplining a child isn't called abuse. The law calls it that, Melissa retorted. Making a child stand on a veranda railing isn't discipline, it's abuse. Hugging her daughter, Melissa said, From today, you disappear from our lives, and you will pay the price for what you did to Harper. Mother and Vanessa looked at each other with fear and anxiety. Both valued their social status and reputation above all else. If this came to light, their lives would crumble. Let's go, Harper. Melissa took her daughter's hand and left the house without looking back. As they got into the car, Melissa strengthened her resolve. They will receive the punishment they deserve. As she started the car engine, Harper said in a small voice, Mom, are we okay? Melissa smiled at her daughter. Yes, we're fine. We'll be together from now on. I'll protect you. In the waiting room of Boston Children's Hospital, a place she had frequented since childhood, Melissa sat quietly with coffee in hand. In the adjacent examination room, Dr. Lauren Schmidt, a child psychology specialist, was talking with Harper. This was their third interview in the past 2 weeks. The day after the first interview, Melissa met with lawyer Jeremy Foster and handed over the hidden camera footage and recordings. Foster examined the evidence, narrowed his eyes, and said with a stern expression, This is clear child abuse. You have strong grounds for legal action. Things moved quickly after that. Reporting to Child Protective Services, the initiation of a formal investigation, and further court filings. Melissa sometimes felt she was losing touch with reality as her life moved in a direction she had never imagined. Suing her mother and sister was something the previous Melissa could never have conceived. The examination room door opened, and Harper and Dr. Schmidt came out. Harper's expression was much calmer than it had been 2 weeks ago. Mom! The girl ran over and hugged Melissa. How was it? Melissa asked, stroking her daughter's hair. Today I talked about scary dreams, Harper answered softly. But Dr. Schmidt said that they're memories from the past and won't happen anymore. Melissa sent a grateful look to Dr. Schmidt. The doctor returned a gentle smile and invited them into her office. Harper's condition is gradually improving, the doctor explained as she took her seat. However, the effects of such psychological abuse can be long-lasting, so ongoing support is necessary. The doctor took a file from her desk. I will submit this evaluation report to the Court and Child Protective Services. It is a detailed record of the abuse Harper suffered, and includes my professional opinion regarding her future protection. Melissa looked through the report. It contained phrases like long-term psychological abuse, endangered physical safety, and serious emotional trauma. Seeing the reality in writing made her heart ache. On the way home, Melissa's cell phone rang. It was from CPS investigator Janet Reed. Melissa, I've finished interviewing Vanessa's children. Janet's voice resonated on the other end of the phone. To be honest, the situation is more complex than imagined. What do you mean? Vanessa's children have also been raised in fear. On the surface, they appeared to be perfectly disciplined children, but when talking to them individually, we found they had been subjected to similar punishments. Melissa pulled the car over to the side of the road and took a deep breath. Oh no. And there's one more important piece of information, Janet continued. You were looking into your mother's asset management, right? Yes. As advised by my lawyer, Melissa answered. Her mother was aging and needed support with some financial decisions. Why? As part of the CPS investigation, we found several emails exchanged between your mother and Vanessa. It seems your mother was planning to distribute most of her pension to Vanessa. And Janet hesitated for a moment. It appears she intended to leave nothing for you and Harper. Melissa was silent. This wasn't just mean-spirited discipline. It was a calculated exclusion. A conspiracy to cut her and her daughter off from the family. The next day, Melissa met with Foster again and shared the new information. He frowned and said, "This changes the situation. It strengthens the grounds for applying for guardianship of your mother's assets." He looked at Melissa. "Actually, your mother was recently diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment by a doctor." Melissa was surprised. She didn't even know her mother had been to see a doctor. "Considering this situation, the court is likely to grant you asset management rights," Foster continued. "At the same time, we will proceed with the child abuse charges." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal procedures and paperwork. Melissa continued to work, take care of Harper, and fight the legal battle. All contact from her mother and Vanessa was directed through her lawyer. 6 months later, the final trial was held. Judith and Vanessa were found guilty of child abuse charges. The judge sentenced them to probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Most importantly, a restraining order was issued against them regarding Harper and one of the underage nephews. At the same time, Melissa formally gained guardianship of her mother's assets. She had the authority to sell her mother's large house and decided to use the funds to establish an education trust fund for Harper. Judith had to move to a small apartment. The reputation of Judith and Vanessa, once respected in the community as exemplary grandmothers and upstanding citizens, was ruined. The church community and friends turned their backs on them after learning of their actions. The most surprising reaction came from Vanessa's husband. Upon learning of his wife's behavior, he was shocked. Subsequently, he filed for divorce and sought custody of the children. Vanessa's visitation rights with her children were restricted, and she fell into financial hardship. On the day they left the courthouse, Melissa held Harper's hand and looked up at the sky. Autumn clouds were drifting by, heralding the arrival of a new season. "Mom, is this the end?" Harper asked. "Yes, in a way," Melissa answered. "But it's also a new beginning. Harper, you're going to be late." Melissa called from the kitchen to the living room. The morning sun shone through the wide windows of their new home, illuminating the entire room. 2 years had passed. Harper had made friends at her new school and joined the drama club. Next week, she would be playing the lead role in the school performance. Melissa's heart warmed just imagining her daughter on stage. "Coming right away." A cheerful voice came back from upstairs. Melissa stood by the window, surveying the garden. It had been a year since they moved into this house. With part of the funds from selling her mother's house, she had purchased this bright home. It was a symbol of a new beginning. "Sorry for the wait." Harper came running down the stairs. Her face no longer showed shadows of anxiety. Her bright smile had returned. Thanks in part to weekly counseling sessions, she was gradually overcoming her past trauma. "It looks like another busy day." Melissa handed her daughter her lunchbox. "After school, I have a meeting with the Child Abuse Prevention Group, so Jessica's mom will pick you up." "Okay," Harper nodded. "Can I come to the next meeting too?" Melissa looked at her daughter in surprise. "Really?" "Yes," Harper said with a serious expression. "My story might help other kids, right?" Melissa was speechless with emotion. She hugged her daughter and kissed her head. "You really are a strong girl." Before leaving for work, Melissa checked the mailbox. There was an unfamiliar envelope. She hesitated for a moment when she saw the sender's name. It was from Vanessa. It wasn't until she reached the office that Melissa found the courage to open the letter. Inside was a long message written in her sister's small, neat handwriting. To Melissa, the letter began. "First, I want to start by fully accepting responsibility for what I did. I make no excuses. My actions were wrong. Vanessa expressed deep remorse and wrote that she had realized she had been raised with similar treatment by their mother. Through counseling, she had begun to understand her behavior patterns. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for hurting Harper. Now I can only swear that I will never do such things again. If someday, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Melissa sighed and gazed out the window. Forgiveness. It wasn't easy. But she didn't want to live harboring hatred. That night, after Harper had gone to bed, Melissa sat on the terrace and looked up at the starry sky. Her relationship with her mother remained completely severed, but with Vanessa, perhaps someday, some kind of relationship could be rebuilt. However, that would only be after prioritizing Harper's feelings. Melissa picked up her wine glass and made a small toasting gesture. To new beginnings. Around her now was a chosen family that wasn't just connected by blood. Parents and children with similar experiences, supportive friends, and above all the stronger bond that had developed between her and Harper. Melissa understood from the bottom of her heart that a true family consists of people who protect, respect, and love each other unconditionally. And now she was surrounded by that true family.